Coaching Exchange here in October 2023. Really, really pleased to have our guest here tonight after quite a break, actually, since we've last seen him. Our guest, Dan Brown, is well known in the Kanban community. People may even know him by his moniker, Kanban Dan. More than that, Dan was one of the handful of Agile coaches that was instrumental early on in my career when I started doing what I do full time. Dan, honestly, so many things that you've taught me have stuck with me for many years. For example, Dan told me very early on, if you think your job as an Agile coach or as a Scrum Master is to go in and sell Agile, you are already on a back foot. And that has really, really stuck with me. And I think so many people don't understand that, or don't realize that. So thank you for that. One of those many, many gifts that you've given me through that time. So Dan is not thinking about Kanban necessarily today. He has a talk today, The Humanity of Agile, and we're really, really pleased to hear what he has to say. So please give him a really warm ACE welcome, Dan Brown.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. So I had a bit of a weird journey coming up with this one. My original thought was I'll do a talk and tell you all about this stuff. And then I had this little thing where my imposter syndrome kicked in. Everyone else familiar with good old imposter syndrome? Inner critic? Yeah. So I started talking to some people on some WhatsApp chats and so on. And I decided instead of a talk, this would be more like a chat, if that's okay. A chat where I'm hoping you're going to contribute lots, and we're going to discover some things together. So the idea is instead of having a predefined conclusion to this talk, the conclusion will emerge. So if you're familiar with the Alan Davies program, As Yet Untitled, our purpose today is to come up with a conclusion to this conversation. And let's find out if it's useful talk. I did have a chat with something, and there was a quote that Gabor Bitera came up with that I loved in response. The frontal education system, where there is a sage on the stage teacher who is the fountain of all knowledge and truth on the podium in the front, and everyone listening is an ignorant little cabbage head. Well, that totally, I'm going to paraphrase, ruins your life. And I kind of got into that, and then I was listening to some music while I was writing the thing, and one of my favourite songs came up. I'm a big Pearl Jam fan, and there was a song called Corduroy. And in Corduroy they say, I don't want to hear from those who know. And that really kind of struck at me as well. I want to hear from everyone. We all know this. We all know what's good about agility. We all know what's bad about agility. We know what works well with the humans we know and what doesn't work with the humans we know. So let's talk about that. Let's make that visible. So that's what I've decided this will be about. With that in mind, I haven't even shared with you yet the mural that we're going to play on. So I'm going to quickly grab a share link and put that into the chat. So yes, you should all be able to join as visitors there. Don't bother signing on, just as a visitor is perfectly fine. And I see you're starting to turn up. What does it look like? Just in case you're concerned, it'll look a bit like that. The humanity of agility. Well, I thought, how do I do a nice image for this? I was thinking it was all about humanity. Let's get AI to do one. So AI generated that for me. I'm not sure if it's good or not, but it's an image, so that'll do. Okay, I'm just basically now filling for you to get there. So I'm seeing a few people. I've got 17 of you so far. Who am I? Well, I'll do this sort of not quite sharing thing for a little while, if that's okay with you. So this is who I am. I am an Agilist, firstly. I'm a human before that, obviously. I'm a professional Scrum trainer, and I'm also an accredited Kanban trainer. So I kind of fit on both little sides of that particular thing. And I'm very keen that people understand Scrum versus Kanban is not a thing. Scrum and Kanban is. If you want to connect to me on LinkedIn, that's my LinkedIn. It's in/KanbanDan. If you want to subscribe on my YouTube channel, knock yourself out. You can if you like, or just look at what I've got. And if you'd like to sign up to any of my classes, I'd really appreciate that. So much so that I've thrown in a 10% discount with the code ACE10. So if anyone wants to sign up to any of my classes, the links are there. But if you just want to have a chat later, obviously LinkedIn is a way to get hold of me. So, shall we begin? I've got a few people coming in. Yeah, let me just summon everybody. Okay. Let's start by defining a few things. I couldn't get Simon to confirm this earlier, but my friend Simon Reindl, I believe I stole this from him. It's certainly what I use as my definition for agility. Because I'm not sure it really matters whether it's manifesto for software or manifesto for agility, whatever it is. The ability to quickly change direction in response to the changing risk of our environment. So I always imagine that's like a gazelle rather than a cheetah. A cheetah is the fastest land animal, but it's got to eat something. And the gazelle's got to have a chance to get away, right? It can't outrun the cheetah, but it can change direction quickly in response to the changing risk of its environment, i.e. the cheetah. So I think that's about Agile. You know, if I think about football, I don't think about necessarily the fast winger. I think about the goalkeeper. The goalkeeper has to change direction really quickly, and that's agility. So what about this idea of humane? I went and had a look at this as well, because I didn't just want to use my definition that already lived in my head. I've seen so many people fall foul of that. And I came out with these things. Pertaining to being a human being, that seems fairly good, but that's quite an old one. Having qualities befitting human beings. Compassion, tenderness. A disposition to kindly treat others. That's from the 1600s. It's all new stuff, isn't it? Or perhaps this pertaining to branches of learning concerned with human affairs. That certainly sounds about right for Agile, although affairs might not do. That might have gone on. Anyhow, the sources are there if you want to go and have a look. But something I always find myself saying in classes when I'm talking about how we deal with our customers, our stakeholders, is to remember that they're human beings before they're stakeholders. So we might think our stakeholders, our product owners and everybody else are really caring about value and maximizing value, as we say product owners are, but certainly the stakeholders. And that's true. But we do have to remember this stuff works in a complex environment. In a complex environment, we have a lot of uncertainty. So here's a question. There's a large group of people. I'm going to ask you to do it using the chat with either a Y for yes or an N for no. Don't hit enter. Answer the question. I'll tell you when to hit enter though. That way we can see them all come in together. Y for yes, N for no. Has a Gantt chart ever come true for you? So Y or N, 3, 2, 1, go. I say a yes, that's more than normal. Sorry, I meant the Gantt chart from the start of the thing, not the Gantt chart you did just before it finished. Does that change the answer? No, it doesn't. I don't know you exactly. And even further than that, when you think a bit deeper, do you think that your stakeholders have ever seen a real Gantt chart come true? Are you in a position where your stakeholders demand one? So they know it ain't going to come true, but they demand it anyway. What on earth is that all about? Well, I think it's because they're humans first. And they would rather have some way of understanding the future in our uncertain universe than nothing. And that gives them a fluffy, warm sense of, well, that works at least. And I've got a date and I've got a time and I've got a cost and I know what I'm going to get by when. I mean, they know it's not true, but it allows them to feel fluffy in the uncertainty for a long time. So I was trying to remember that. And that's where this all came from. So with all that said, I said I wasn't going to talk too much. Let's do an exercise. So hopefully you are all on the mural. If not, please do come because you're going to have to play. The act of planning is important. The plan itself is less important. You know what? I say almost exactly the same about estimation. Estimation is important because you get shared tacit knowledge, but the estimate itself is usually harmful in the complex domain. Yeah, and what Michael said, a Gantt chart works when you have to have the same building site 1,000 times. And that's the thing. I love watching grand designs where they're building unique houses, but they're trying to work in an industry that's designed around project planning because it's about a big housing developer building 100 of the same homes time after time after time and scheduling the work. So Here is, in a scale, I've made it really, really wide, so I'll have to zoom in. On this side, the question, what do you like and dislike about Agile? As a human, what do you love about it on the left-hand side? Then we spin across. Stuff you quite like would kind of be in that sort of area. Stuff that's fairly neutral. Don't like it, don't hate it, in the middle. To stuff you could do without. Right along to the stuff you absolutely hate about Agile. I've put loads of sticky notes for you to use, but I do have some example of the things. So for example, autonomy. That's a thing we do in Agile a lot. Is that a good thing for humans or a bad thing for humans? Well, I know what Dan Pink thinks. Therefore, what I've been taught to think. But what do you think? So if you want to talk about autonomy, write autonomy in a box and stick it somewhere. Or nick that one. I know some people don't like collaboration. They like to just work on their own. But this Agile thing kind of demands it a bit, doesn't it? We have to collaborate together. So that might not be so popular. But other people might love the fact that at last we have to talk out loud. So what things do you see in the world of Agile that are good or bad? Add them yourself and stick them on. And what we'll do is we'll have a conversation about it. I was thinking 2 minutes to get started, and we're going to always come back and do other stuff. Is that okay? I've set up a timer.
That's good.
I feel like I should sing a song in the background, but that's just going to put everybody off. This is being recorded. If you aren't writing, you might find it really useful to have a read of what other people are putting on there. And that might inspire you to think of things for yourself as well. But the more things we have, the more contributions, the more we'll have some really good group learning in this session. And if it gets really desperate, I do have some I prepared earlier, but I'm really don't want to bring in my stuff. And if anybody does want to talk about it rather than just write about it, feel free. I'm going to have a sneaky look now. Oh, there's a lot of stuff on the left, look. The Agile Coaching Exchange, we like Agile practices. And things like continuous learning, adaptability, deliver value quicker, transparency, feedback loops to help course correction and learning, half of empiricism, but I'm sure it's coming soon, opportunity to learn from our immediate experience, the community itself, absolutely, working closely, yeah, okay, continuous feedback loops. I guess the word meh should come in there, shouldn't it? I'm intrigued to see what's on the right-hand side. Oh, Agile Death March and Dark. I don't know what that means, but I'm intrigued. If you want to share, please do. If not, that's okay. Layers of leadership not being... Leadership not brought in. Oh, is that a problem for anybody else? Anyone else experienced that idea of you go in, you're brought in to do the teams down there?
100%.
But yeah, nobody actually buys it at the top end. Or even worse, the top end leaders are bought in, but everyone in between isn't, the pressured middle.
Yeah, the pressured middle is the one I always have problems with.
Yeah.
Frozen middle, like that, yeah.
I always think that's a bit harsh on them. The thing I always like to remember when I'm thinking about any of these things, especially the people I'm having trouble with, you know the ones, I always try and remember when they're getting dressed in the morning and putting their pants on one leg at a time, just like all the rest of us, they aren't spending their time going, what can I do to screw Dan up today?
Yeah. Oh, you haven't worked with some of the colleagues I worked with.
Looking back, I can think of two. Two that might have been a bit like that I would really never want to work with again. But I think most people are trying to get things done despite everybody else. You know, like we are. I think we're all the heroes in our stories. There's a wonderful sketch from episode 1 of Armstrong and Miller back when they did a sketch show. And they're both in World War II in Nazi uniforms, noticing that their cap badge is a skull with crossbones. It's like, do you think we're the baddies? And I think it's a perfectly legitimate point. Nobody thinks they're the baddies. You wouldn't go to war if you thought you were on the wrong side, would you? You have to kind of believe in what we're doing. Burnout potential. Work from home culture. Oh, that's probably a bigger thing since the last couple of years, isn't it? It's post-COVID. Oh, here we go. On the right-hand side. Who'd have thought there's a load on the left-hand side and a load on the right-hand side? Too many chiefs. Process Nazis. Having to justify my role. Oh, that's a tricky one. Agile framework evangelists. That's that whole thing Ben was talking about. It's amazing that Ben says, oh, you said this thing, and I'm like, I cannot remember that at all because my memory is not that good, I'll be absolutely honest. But it kind of does sound like a thing, because I'm not a fan of evangelism itself, because that is very sales, and I don't think we should be selling it. We should be talking about it in a very dispassionate way. I think we should be explaining it and letting people understand it better rather than selling it. Burnout. Too much continuous improvement and learning. I remember a beautiful thing that a lady called Catherine Kirk told me she did it at a talk in London, Lean Agile Days once. And she says, because she's quite a spiritual person, she was very concerned at the rate of change and its effect on the human being. And so she went to her Buddhist monk saying, what can we do about this? And, should I worry about this? And his response was the most Buddhist monk thing I've ever heard in my life. Toughen up. It ain't going to slow down. Like, whoa. Is that the world we live in now? But it is. It's all change, isn't it? Is there anything on there that triggers you that you want to talk about? Amy, you've got your hand up. Go for it.
Yes, hi Dan. I've been hearing some of the people in the community talking about that agility is no longer going to be the trend and it's fading away, specifically agile coaches, and it's more like I get like some advice from my colleagues and my friends like, let's be more like product coaches is more understandable and they're positioned in the market than agile coaches. So I don't know what you think about that. This is really I think interesting, but also tough, because some agile coaches do support Scrum or Safe or specific frameworks, and I'm more agnostic, and I know majority of the agile coaches are agnostic of framework as well, and I think that might be the reason, but I wanted to ask you in case you have more insights on that.
I have a different viewpoint, not necessarily more insight, if that's useful.
Sure, yeah, definitely. Go ahead.
So my viewpoint is it's become commoditized. And I remember when I became an agile coach, I remember distinctly I'd been a Scrum Master, and then I was effectively a Scrum Master on a Kanban delivery, which is, we didn't have a name for that, so we just called me Scrum Master, because otherwise it was going to be Flow Master, and that's a brand of toilet, so we weren't going there. Anyway, so I did that, and then I went for my next job, and they said, well, you can be an agile coach. So I changed my job title to agile coach, and then I met Ben. Hi, Ben. Bizarrely, that was that job, that gig, and it was literally that's it. It's like there's no barrier to entry, there's no qualification. The first thing you got to do is change your job title on LinkedIn, and the second thing you got to do is ideally get a job. Now you're a professional, right?
Yeah.
So it's like my wife. She's a professional artist. I'm an amateur artist because I've never sold any of my work. I make jewelry too, but I've never sold one of my necklaces. Therefore, I'm not a professional jeweler, but I am an amateur. I go through a lot of hobbies, and I think that's got part of it. So it's become a thing that got commoditized, and then everyone jumped on the bandwagon, including the larger consultancies. And I remember talking to someone at a gig once, and they were being billed from one of the largest consultancies there is. I'm not going to name them. At £2,500 a day, I believe they were out. They were being billed for. And I mentioned the Scrum Guide, and they said, "What's that?" And I thought, as an Agile coach, you don't even know of the existence of the Scrum Guide. Not, are we doing it? Are we not?
Yeah.
I'm not a fan of SAFe in general,
Yeah.
but I've read the website. I've looked at it. I know what it is. I haven't just come up with no opinion from nowhere. It's kind of weird that you would have that job for a living and not be aware of what's out there. And, you've got, I think with being agnostic, you've got to start with understanding some stuff first.
Yeah.
Otherwise, what are you agnostic of? Which is kind of a thing. And I think there's become so many of that. And I know there's been a trend I've seen in some of my colleagues complaining a lot about people who are actually life coaches, branding themselves as Agile coaches without any learning or experience first.
Yeah.
Is that any different to what I did? Well, I had some knowledge, I guess. Should the barriers to entry be different for them as me? That seems a bit harsh, doesn't it? So that's the kind of thing I think is going on there. Is it's become commoditized. It's become something that got sold rather than bought.
Yeah.
And once it's in that sell thing, the thing Ben said at the start, how bizarre that's completely clouded my judgment now and made me think, yeah, that is a thing. But when it's all about sales rather than it's all about people choosing to buy into something, it becomes different. And it becomes about the process. Has anyone here had to use the Spotify model at all?
I deliberately didn't want to use it.
Did anyone go to the original talks that Henrik gave about it? Where he used this phrase at the end. And of course, this was all theoretical. We never actually got it implemented and was designed for a small Swedish startup music company using language that was appropriate to us. Don't use it yourself. Come up with your own.
Yep. I read it in an article. Didn't see the talk, but yeah. It was great.
And I work with an organization. It's a national North America organization. They're going through a transformation, and they started throwing in vocabulary from the Spotify model. And I'm like, hello, excuse me, you can't use that here. We are not Spotify. Our maturity level is 0 right now.
And it becomes a barrier to entry almost, doesn't it? As if the word's important, not the concept behind it.
Right.
And I'm with you on that one as well.
And they want safe, they want all these things. And I'm like, wait, time out. Before, and then they feel like it's failing, but again, then they go back to what they were doing before, which isn't working anyway. So
yeah,
I think it's detrimental.
I actually had the idea once of writing a talk or a session. Whether it would be a talk or not these days is a funny one. We'll see how this goes by the end of it. But on Scrum Doesn't Work, that would be the title. And coming up with the thousands of ways you can make sure that Scrum doesn't work in your organization. I know I've picked Scrum specifically. I am a professional Scrum trainer. I am a fan of Scrum. It's a great way to get started, and it's a great way to get delivering. And is it the end state for everyone? Not necessarily. And is it appropriate to everyone? Of course not. It's appropriate in a very specific circumstance. And there are so many ways to prove Scrum doesn't work. My method, I've come to believe this. If you have an existing team and then try and apply Scrum to that existing team, you're probably going to fail.
Well, but is it not possible that you learn out of failures? So I have experience with organizations who discover Spotify vocabulary or patterns, and I'm happy that they discover it, that they can experiment with it. So I'm not saying like, are you stupid? We don't use this. I'm saying like, give it a try, learn from it, and then evolve to something you make your own. Yeah. So I'm sort of not in the camp of saying no one is allowed to be inspired by Spotify. I think
inspired is a very good word
to experiment.
And I think that's the thing. It was always meant to be an inspiration rather than a blueprint.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And that's the problem when it's sold as a blueprint and applied on organizations. That's where I think, and I think, like I said, I think it's even at the Scrum is minimalist, right? There's very little you've got to do to be doing Scrum. You know, basically 11 things you've got to do, the 3-3-5. But there are so many ways, like I say, if you put it on an existing team, I bet they're not cross-functional. I bet that would be like going to Manchester United instead of looking for the team going, can all the goalkeepers stand together, please? Right, you're the goalkeeping team. Can we have all the defenders over there? That's the defending team, midfield team and strikers team. And who are you going to play next week in the Premier League? I mean, not the goalkeepers. You need a few of everything. And I think most work teams aren't really true teams. And that's therefore applying Scrum on top ends up with this weird pattern where you go from team 1 to team 2 to team 3 to team 4, which Scrum would never work for. That's not what it's designed for. So it's going to be really hard in the first place. So Michael, I've been ignoring your hand for like 20, 30 seconds. It's now banging on the back of my head. Michael. I've scared you off now, haven't I? I've given you too big a build-up. So yeah, I do think there are lots of ways to prove this stuff. Oh, I can hear you now. Yes, go for it.
Sorry about that. Yeah, sorry. It's an additional mute setting, not just a Zoom one. So yeah, I think what you learn from applying Scrum to an existing team is that you can destroy the productivity of a team kind of permanently, and that's something that I've seen. Most people don't do that because they're humans and they sort of realize this is going badly and they stop. But some people certainly can kind of achieve the total destruction of what was previously a pretty productive team and sort of force them into bad habits.
Yeah. Can I draw a picture? I think it'd be really appropriate in this situation, and I just need to turn on a tool to do it. This change curve here, anyone familiar with that?
Yes, David Viney's change curve. Adapted from David Viney's curve.
I always heard it as Virginia Satir.
Yeah.
Ooh.
And I've never found a colour photograph of Virginia Satir, so it was a long time ago, but I don't know how long.
I don't think it's his, but his change curve is the original curve that this was adopted from. So
Boom.
it could be that it's her work, but inspired by his J curve change.
Oh, well.
I can send it in the chat and then we can...
I would love to know it because it means I don't misinform people, and I hate misinforming people. So if we have up the y-axis, we have a level of productivity, level of effectiveness, basically being good at stuff. And across the x-axis, we have time going across here. If you get to this point here where you are doing something, and it's going pretty okay, and then you introduce a change, performance always drops off. Hopefully it bottoms out, comes up and comes back to higher. But that usually takes a lot longer to do than we think. So if you adopt Scrum, when do we expect to see any advantage with it at all?
At the end of the sprint, obviously.
Sprint 1?
Yeah, sprint 1, definitely.
Yeah, for the win.
Yeah. Of course, it's never going to happen.
But this is the thing. It's actually something we actually teach in the Professional Scrum Master class. They actually have an exercise around it called How Do You Know It's Working? Where you have to talk to the CEO and explain whether Scrum's working or not and make people think about that, because I think it's a really important thing as well. It's an important thing to understand of how we measure this. And here's a question to you all. I've hidden you so I can't see you. Let's make you visible again. Who's measuring? Who's measuring value delivery? Who's measuring how effective we are? Not how much stuff we get done.
Well,
How much value we get done.
Police are policing ourselves. However, of late I've been asking the product managers and product owners to give us what a business value is. And then they put that into the Jira board and we win because we're providing more value.
And I think there's a really important reason to do it. I do not believe any human being is employed by an employer to do work. I think we're employed to deliver value, with doing work as the proxy in the middle. Does that sound reasonable to you? But all we talk about performance reviews and things is how much work we did, what work we did. And if you work in the Agile space, you don't even get much control about what you're going to work on because it's going to change all the time. So you certainly can't plan for the next 6 months or a year what you're going to work on to show how effective you are, which I think is always a bit mad. But we just don't focus on measuring that. And I think there are good tools out there. There are really good things like cost of delay, if you want to look at black swan farming on that one, or look at Don Reinertson's work on where the shortest job first and that whole thing based on cost of delay. That's really cool. There's the EBM guide, evidence-based management. That's a thing. That's quite useful. That's got a lot of good measures in there as well. It's funny, my instinct was to look at the right-hand side of this and see where we're doing. Is there anything that someone else has written that you've read and gone, what the hell? That you want to ask a question about?
I have a question. It's not quite what you meant from the board, but you started off saying always remember your stakeholders human before they are stakeholders.
Yeah.
So would you mind expanding a bit on that? What you mean? What kind of things you're looking out for when you think about that?
So for me, that's understanding that they have a lot of skin in the game. You know, they're usually funding the work somehow, or their career rests on the success or failure of the work. Big, in terms of the big picture of it as well. Does that make sense? You know, they're betting typically more than the people who are working on teams to deliver the thing, because we can always work on the next thing, right? This is their thing.
But isn't that saying the opposite then, that they're stakeholders more than they're humans because their stake is bigger?
But they're having to live in this world of uncertainty. So in the old days, if we were doing a project, we'd give them a Gantt chart that would give them false certainty about the future. We'd use lots of qualifying words and everything else, but it would be taken as, they've got it in hand. How do I know they've still got it in hand? Oh, let's do weekly reports with the RAG status. We've all had the same greenwashing experience, I'm sure, where if you're if you're a direct worker, you try and do some work, you say, hang on, this isn't working, it's red. Project manager comes along, tweaks it to amber. Program manager comes along, tweaks it to green. By the time the senior bosses see it, it's kind of like, in the old days, we used to say, wherever the Queen visits, everywhere smells the same, no matter what they do. It always smells of fresh paint, because you're going to paint the area before the Queen comes to visit, right? It's the same as that. If you only ever see green RAG statuses, your job as a strategic leader, as a big stakeholder, is to make strategic decisions based on the information, but we're misinforming them almost deliberately as a policy. We see that so often. Yet we want them to make good decisions, and we hold them to account for their decisions, and they get fired. That's beautiful, I think. But thinking first that these are human beings living in a volatile, uncertain world. And now, instead of having these tools to lean on, that means I can see it's going okay. I have this, even if it is false, certainty about understanding what's going on. All I'm being told is, it'll be ready when it's ready, by a lot of people in Agile. By the way, that's not good. It's just what I've heard a lot in Agile. And we're not quite sure yet. And we don't really know. And it might be done by then, but it might not. Which are kind of true, but actually we can give them much... If you care about forecasting, get into the whole thing with probabilistic forecasting. It's easier to do than all the guesswork we usually do in estimation. And it's actually more useful. And it's quick, simple, and it has no opinion baked in. Facts, not opinions, a good thing. But we can do all those kind of things. But if we leave them out there, especially if they are this frozen middle, and say we don't know anymore, when we always used to know, even if we were wrong, they understand. They're not idiots, right? They understand that it was never certain and it was never right. But as a human, let's go back. And most of us are in the UK. Do you remember the daily calls with Boris Johnson during COVID times?
Yeah.
Especially coming out the last lockdown. The questions were all, people like, I run a pub. I'm not quite sure when you're going to take the lockdown down, but when you do, they're going to come to my pub and want beer. If I buy loads of beer now, it might go off. If I don't buy it now, I'll have loads of people and no beer to sell them. What should I do, please? As if Boris Johnson had the answers. I mean, whether you like him or hate him, let's put that to one side. Nobody did, right? And these weren't idiots asking these questions. They were just people being people. They were being human. And it's inhumane to say, we don't know. Live with it. Live in uncertainty. You guess. See how it goes. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. The Boris Johnson analogy is a good one.
I always try and lean on a metaphor, analogy, or something like that. Try and make it simple, because, yeah, this stuff I think is tricky. So I do want to say one thing I haven't noticed on here. Anyone living in a world of Kanban-y stuff where you've been told to limit work in progress? How's that going for you? Anyone a fan?
That's two different questions, right? Yes, I'm a fan of, but I've never been told to. Teams didn't want to do it, actually.
But this is the thing, is the autonomy thing, right? We're autonomous. We decide what we're going to do. But you're trying to inflict WIP limits on us? So I'm going to share something. I've taught a lot of Kanban classes. I know you're shocked. No, I have taught a lot of Kanban classes. A lot of them use games and simulations where you can play with WIP limits to see what happens. In those classes where people who have chosen to pay money and, more importantly, spend their time to learn Kanban, as soon as they're playing a game and have access to WIP limits, what do you think they do with the WIP limits?
Break them.
They increase it?
Increase them. The kind of people who've been told all morning about what Kanban's about spend the afternoon trying to increase WIP limits, till I have to have the talk, which starts a bit like what I just did. When I say that, I've probably run one of the game simulations over 100 times, and I think twice ever has a team not increased WIP limits at some point, despite being told that reducing WIP limits will mean you get more stuff done, deliver more value and happier customers, blah, 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 all that. Amazingly, it's so counterintuitive, and I think it's actually inhumane, and this is kind of where it started for me, so I was surprised it didn't come up, because typically, who comes on a Kanban class? We're talking the average job title of a Kanban class attendee might be
Scrum Master, Agile Coach.
Sometimes product manager, product owner type roles. Delivery manager, I hear that a lot. Delivery lead sometimes. But, analogous to Scrum Master is the normal job title for someone coming to that class. And then they've got to go back to their teams and sell this concept of limiting WIP. Oh, did I say sell, Ben? I'm sorry. But that's how it starts, right? And of course, you can't change people's minds for them. I think that's one of the weirdest things I hear in our community. That's the most inhumane thing, is we have to change people. Do you? Is that not evil? Changing people. Surely we need to enable them to change themselves. So how do you go about that? Interesting, I think. So I don't know. I will say the one thing I found in that space that works isn't a convincing argument. It's experiential learning. And do you remember good old Spotify was Henrik Nieberg? Well, he's a wonderful game to go play called How Long Does It Take to Write a Name? I'll put the link in later for the blog so you can have access to this mural forever. I'll put the links of some of the people I've talked about in there. And that takes about 40 minutes. I've even played it at conferences. You can play it with multiple teams of 7 people at once. And it teaches people why limiting work in progress is a good idea. But even then, do you want to know how many times I've seen a team or anybody limit WIP to the right level, to a low enough level? 0. I've never seen them get down to optimum. Not yet. I'm sure somebody must have done it sometime. But how do you want your Kanban board to look when the boss comes by? Like you're really busy, or like you got nothing on? Do you see what I'm saying here about that humanity thing? I want to make them look like I'm busy because I'm important, aren't I? Is there anything else we want to talk about here before we move on to the next bit?
The need to show busy that drives people to fill the board, or it could be other reasons, like, for example, they're stuck with something and they start doing something else. or dependencies, or not mobbing enough, or other reasons? Do you think it's usually showing busy?
No, I think all of those things I would count as that. I know that's really harsh, right? So, hi, I'm Kanban Dan, and I believe Kanban's a really good way to get more things done for less effort, which is quite good for humans, by the way, because you get to feel good about stuff. I know that, for example, moving a ticket from left to right on a board releases endorphins that make you happier, which increases morale, which means you get more stuff done, which makes you happier, but virtuous circle. I'm happy to leverage tricks like that as long as I'm playing tricks with the team rather than on the team, so do it publicly. But when you talk about things like dependencies, when you talk about you can't work on that, you have to switch to something else, they're all bad things that we want to eliminate. We don't want to have to task switch because that's expensive and wasteful. In fact, the whole purpose of limiting WIP is so that you don't task switch. Dependencies, what can you do to avoid them? How does Scrum deal with dependencies, or the majority of them? Anybody? Scrum's well known.
That the Scrum Master take care of, but at least to address it. But the thing about the dependencies, one thing I want to say, and also like, I mean, the method is chosen, right? So we do Kanban, but this is in my experience, it starts before, like your team is not cross-functional, whatever, and it's because the team is not sized or not the right people in the team. You have dependencies to other teams. And this is where the companies don't want to have a look for, because it's going to cost more money and it's an enterprise. And so it's about the sizing of the product teams. They don't really have like appropriate product teams. And then I have dependencies, at least, let's say in testing or in whatever, like I'm waiting for people to test my work or to just give feedback. And so I have 6 weeks or whatever, as a colleague is sick or whatever. And then so it doesn't make sense in my experience. So we couldn't limit the work in progress, for example, in testing or whatever, waiting for information.
So, can I switch the word tester and call them a goalkeeper for a second? And ask how a football team would deal with the situation where you don't have a goalkeeper available to save the goal just now.
Put like a striker in the goal or whatever, like another guy.
Football seems a simple game. Software is complex, so cannot really compare it, right?
No, football's absolutely complex. You have no idea what the opposition's going to do at any given time. You have no idea if there's going to be a stoppage because someone had a heart attack in the stands. You don't know if the referee's going to have an absolute nightmare and send one of your players off for good.
But that's
happened to my team 2 weeks ago. Huge amount of complexity as soon as you got human behavior involved, and that's why we do use it. But no, I absolutely believe that, and I don't think software is any more complex than any other kind of knowledge work. This is my understanding of software, and this is my understanding of software having started off as an assembly language programmer for a living. You have a complex problem to solve, you get a bunch of people around a whiteboard, you come up with some ideas of how you can tackle it, then you start writing it up. And you write it up using a very specific language on a very specific document in a very specific place. And you hit go. That's software, right? Ideally, you test it as well, but that's writing software. Whereas if you've got a contract to do between your organization and another, the lawyers get around a boardroom table, pull up a whiteboard, thrash out this complex problem, how we're going to solve it, then they write it up using specific language in a specific document that goes in a specific place. Unlike your finance team when they're doing the tax returns, when they have to work out how to make the thing add up to zero, because it's got a balance, right? And then once they do, they write it up, and you see what I'm saying here. Knowledge work is knowledge work is knowledge work is knowledge work. Software is nothing actually that different when you zoom out a tiny bit. It's just that it's kind of new enough that we really dive in on it and think it's special and different, but it really isn't. And football, rugby, pick a sport. I like a sporting analogy because it uses teams. And this is what I was trying to get back to. The way you deal with it is you hire some goalkeepers and make them part of your team. You have goalkeepers in the team. In Scrum, we call that having a cross-functional team, and that's how you get rid of most dependencies in Scrum. There aren't any. It's done in the team. Where's the dependency? Occasionally, you have a very rare subject matter expert or something unexpected happens. It's rare and weird. But in general, we don't have it for everything. We shouldn't have lots of them if we have a truly cross-functional team. In Kanban, you make it visible and say what you're going to do about it. You use the opportunity to inspect and adapt at the point and make it very visible. And in the same way, Kanban and Scrum are both identical in this. They won't solve your problems, but they don't often make them visible for you to solve yourself. And say, well, what are you going to do about it? And I think this is the challenge we often have with Agile, is applying it on top of what we already do, rather than starting, well, if we're going to do this in this way, how would we begin? How could we put a cross-functional team together where we can deliver something useful? What would we need in the Scrum team? What would we need in that team delivering Kanban services?
So I'd like to argue a little bit about what you just said.
Go for it.
It's not there's going out hiring related goalkeepers or hiring related testers. You know, everybody should be a tester. Even Scrum Masters turn their sound to test. Isn't it a case of, in this instance, if you don't have the funds to get out, go and get QA, ask your striker to play in goal for a bit. You teach them how, you give coaching on how they can be a goalkeeper. You give them some mentoring.
What would be, I mean, there are pros and cons to that. Everything's always in contention, right? It's always this versus that. There are advantages and disadvantages to every solution. What's the disadvantage? Well, how many times have you heard software engineers like me say, I'm not a tester?
Yeah.
That's somebody else's job. And that's not acceptable, really, because we are all humans before that. And this is where I go back to rugby. I'm a big fan of rugby. I'm a rugby coach. I coach Scrum 2 different ways, ironically. But when I look at the forward pack in rugby, they're all very different. Like, you've got some big 6'9" players. They're the second rows and back rows occasionally. You've got someone who's probably less than 6 foot who plays hooker. And the hooker's the only person who has to be able to throw the ball straight at the line out and hit those big jumpers. You've got the big props, and they're the only people who have to be responsible for holding up the scrummage. So they've got very specific responsibilities, skills, and attributes. But actually, they're all rugby players who have to be able to run, catch, and pass, and tackle. If you can't do the basic skills of rugby, you can't do any of the other specialisms. And so there are some things that you can do and help. And I always think that's the least we can do. The least we can do is ask stupid questions to make the expert explain themselves in different language so that they understand it from a different perspective. You know, a dumb question typically makes someone go, I'm thinking of my complex problem from your point of view. And that changes their understanding. So dumb questions are the best. So the least you can do is pair with somebody and help them be better at their job. But there are certain jobs you just wouldn't want an amateur playing. For me, that would be anything to do with safety, where it's unsafe. And, you know, is it your risk to take? Is something that we often forget when we're doing Agile. Are we risking the brand? Are we going to put the CEO out of business because we did a silly thing in this team? Because we often feel autonomy beyond our, not necessarily capability, but beyond our risk. We're putting someone else at risk for a risk we're taking on their behalf without asking their permission, quite often. So you have to be a bit careful in that space. So I think the answer is, Andy, it's nuanced.
Yeah.
And it depends on those things. I always say consultants say it depends. Scrum Masters say it depends on these things. And explain what it depends on. It depends is too easy an answer, isn't it? And we are coming up to wrap-up-y time, aren't we, Ben? So what I had envisaged... Go ahead.
Can I have one question about the sports analogy, the rugby and Scrum?
Go for it.
I heard many people say that people who do sports, they have a goal of winning. They play a very short, focused match in the game, and they are very connected with each other, and they have all the same objective.
Yeah.
If I look at most of the companies who work day in, day out for years in and out with managers where there is no shared goal, and then the developers need to be a super elite sports team that's play with each other, which doesn't happen. It's sometimes not a good analogy or metaphor to think about that those people who work day in, day out, they have to think that they are sports top athletes, players. They can have different analogies, I think.
I would say the analogy holds beautifully, and what it's highlighting is the problem, which is lack of shared goals and objective.
Yeah, but
shouldn't a team have a shared goal? I mean, isn't that what a team is? A bunch of people who come together to achieve a goal, or common goal.
In theory, yeah, in theory.
In which case, yes, and Shouldn't the managers be aligned to those goals too? Shouldn't the organization be aligned to one or a small number of goals that we're trying to achieve right now? And that's why OKRs get popular. Things like, this is what we're trying to achieve. Actually, a question I ask a lot in classes, and it's a really rude question that I ask, is, especially when we talk about product vision or company vision, every single company's got a company vision statement. Could you repeat yours verbatim right now if I asked you? Anyone? I'm not saying you should, by the way, but could you? Would you have to Google it? Because if you can't say it right now.
In here, Dan?
Yeah.
That's what I also observed. You know, I had this point before when we were talking about value and where to short jobs first and whatever, cost of delay. So this discussions, or EBM, I really like the EBM. I try to develop something to implement in the enterprise, but that's always a problem. Like, we were working with an IT company, 3,000 people working there for a enterprise. So we were just the IT delivery. So what is our mission? What is our value? So the big company had the mission and the vision, but we as IT, like, how do we use any value, you know? And you ask the people, you ask tech VPs, you ask CEOs. Nobody has an idea. Say, guys, we need strategic goals, to feel like a soccer team or whatever. We need strategic goals that we have this feeling. But if we don't have a vision and mission where we go, we also don't have strategic goals. And then it's also hard to talk about value, because where we will know. And then also leaders, it doesn't matter which level, they don't communicate to other leaders or to the teams. So we're just doing something and nobody knows why are we doing this.
And I think that's absolutely critical to the whole thing. And it's like I say, when I ask people that question, what's your company vision? If you don't know it, your company doesn't have one. If everyone isn't living and making decisions every single day to align with what we're trying to achieve, then what you've got is a consultancy that was paid to do some lip service so it looks nice on a website. It doesn't actually bring us together and achieve anything. Surely, if you want to have a purpose-based organization, back to Dan Pink, autonomy, mastery, and purpose. If you want a purpose-led organization, we all have to come together towards that common purpose. And if we don't all know what it is, then we're just turning up to get paid, aren't we?
There's also the question coming up, like they just always measure value like monetary, right? It's what we also say in Agile, or like there should be different ways, whatever, customer satisfaction to measure, but they're so uncreative and they always come back, okay, so how can we measure our value as a IT? Because we just do things for business, that's the value, and they no, there is no inspiration to find other ways to measure value than just monetary ones.
I'm not sure that the IT department's got long to live in our culture. I think my instinct is when electricity was new and different, big companies would have an electricity department. Not so much anymore. Which job nowadays doesn't involve IT in the workplace, in the knowledge workplace? Everything's got at least to be done on a computer, right? It's probably got shared technology. It's probably got some sort of built-in tool that we use. Marketing. Yeah, that's definitely an IT job. Finance is an IT job. If finance wasn't an IT job, explain Excel to me. The earliest and greatest prototyping tool of them all. That ends up being the final tool for many people, unfortunately. If they're writing software, just using Excel language. All of this, I think it's becoming that IT and the business are the same thing. How do you separate them? Where's the line? Unless you're actually maintaining and distributing laptops or servers, but who looks after servers these days? It's all Amazon Web Services or whoever, isn't it? It's all on the cloud. Cloud equals someone else's computer, right? I don't know. I'm wondering how that fits in.
That's the hybrid transformation, right? Or else it's like the world you're in. Like let's say at least Agile, or the IT wants to do Agile, and you still have business who doesn't do Agile, and they measure value and they tell you what to do. And then, and you got product owners, it takes too much space with this, I think. But it's like, we had this before on the map. The ideal world and the realistic world and the hybrid and the transformation and safe and whatever.
I think the point you're making is absolutely important, though. These are the things we forget to put in place before we think, well, let's pick an Agile framework or an Agile method or a non-Agile method if you're using Kanban. We focus on the shiny thing rather than understanding you've got to put things in place first. Like, actually, this is only going to work if you have cross-functional teams who have got shared goals. It might work if we have people aligned with the vision of what we're trying to do and an understanding of what value means here. If we can do those things, Agile is much more likely to be successful. And if you can't do those things, I think what will happen immediately is that Agile will show you those problems to fix. And it'll be very frustrating. You end up with a little red mark on the forehead from the wall. I think we've all been there at some point in our career. But yeah, we're coming up to time. I don't want to push to it. So this was a bit of an experimental one for me. So I would love feedback. I'm not hard to get hold of. I've got my little logo up there, Kanban Dan. Please grab me online if you want to have a chat on LinkedIn or something, /Kanban Dan. Drop me an email. My website's kanbandan.com. Please come on one of my classes if you like this kind of thing. I have a bit more knowledge on the classes. I've tried deliberately to step back a little bit here, although I'm not quite sure how it worked. So if you have feedback, cool. Love to hear it, because that's how I get better. I did prepare another thing that we haven't used. So if I summon you on the mural, if you're on there, a what, so what, now what? If you're not familiar with it, the idea is you'd spend a little bit of time in the what column thinking about what did you learn in this session? Just a small number of, these were the things I need to go and think about now. If you haven't got any yet, please look at what the other people wrote. There's a lot of knowledge on that board. Then the so what, which is what are the implications? What does that mean to me? And then the last one is the important one. But you're going to get to it from the other two, which is the now what. Now you know that and you know the impact of that. What are you going to do? What concrete actions? I suggest 2 or less.
Could you share the link from the mural, please, again, in the chat?
Absolutely. I think I've probably still got it in my clipboard. No, I haven't. Of course not, but I can quickly go and get it. It's this hard. But yeah, if you want to have a further conversation about any of this stuff as well, I'm intrigued and interested, and for hire, all of those things are true. But hopefully you got something out of this session and got to play in with a bit. I am a big believer in you learn more when you're writing than reading and talking than listening. So I hope you got something out of it. If you didn't, I apologize. If you thought this was going to be something different, I apologize. It was like this. And on that, I want to shut up and leave it to Ben.
Thank you very much, Dan. So always finishing a session on an apology. No, all good. Really, really great to have you here tonight. Thanks for sharing your thoughts and your time and your skill with us tonight. And thanks everyone for attending. It's been great to see so many of you. We are back at ACE on Wednesday, the 29th of November, when we will be hosting Gem Jelly. And I have not yet received the agenda from him, but we're going to chase him in the next week. So watch the space on our LinkedIn and on our meetup page. There'll be something up soon, but I really look forward to seeing you in another time. So nothing else to say other than thanks again to Dan, and see you all soon.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Cheers.